Hola, hola, mi gente. Welcome to another episode of the Wine and Chisme podcast, where we drink wine, where we chismear about any and all things. And today, my guest is Monica Rivera. How are you, Monica?
I am well. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you. I'm really excited because I love talking to other Latinas and other women that come from communities of color in regards to like building us up, right? Like that's what we need to do. We need to come out unapologetically these days. When we're talking, we both got our curls out, our hoops on, ready to do the thing.
That's the way it has to be, showing up as ourselves.
Yes.
Mm.
So let me read your bio, then we'll get into the wine. And I have a
Okay.
little like I'm really excited about the wine that I actually just tried it the other day, but I'll tell you in a minute. Monica Rivera is a personal brand strategist, speaker, and podcaster who empowers mid-career professionals and entrepreneurs to ditch self-doubt and amplify their impact. Through one-on-one coaching, she helps them build authentic personal brands rooted in values and story. Monica's clients go from crafting compelling pitches to commanding stages and becoming engaging podcast guests. As a sought after speaker herself, she's done TEDx, the New York Times, Podcast Movement, and more. Monica understands the power of connecting with an audience. Her coaching unlocks your unique voice, ensuring you stand out and land the opportunities you deserve. She is a proud Latina from the Bronx. Let me preface by saying that my dogs are in the living room with me and they start playing. Mama snaps and they're like, uh-oh. My husband was like, do you want me to put them in the room? And I'm like, no, they're usually pretty good. And of course, the one time he asked. So if you guys hear any craziness in the background, it's the dogs playing, which I'll be, or if you hear me snapping, it's because they're getting out of control. Monica, before we get into the chisme, we always start with the wine. Are you drinking any wine today?
Okay, so I'm not drinking wine today, but I drink Coke Zero, and I wanted to put it in a wine glass for you
There
on
you
account of this so that I could be very fancy with you.
Oh, well, you know what's so funny is today I'm not drinking out of a wine glass. I am drinking wine and I'll be pouring it here in a second. But this is actually a very, very cool wine. It is by Parra Wines and it is a Tomalo Frío. And let me see if I can get it in the, can you see you can see I've started drinking it. Um, and it's actually a it's a dry Zinfandel. No, is it a dry Zinfandel? No, it's a dry Tempranillo. Sorry, excuse me. It's a dry Tempranillo and it is infused with Jamaica and cinnamon tea. So he is the first Sam Parra, the owner of Parra Wines,
Mhm.
is the first domestic Latino wine brand to own a wine formula. So since there's a cinnamon tea plus hibiscus fused in the
Mhm.
wine, and apparently like having your own wine formula is obviously an asset to the company. So I'm gonna pour myself. So the way that you drink this one, he Sam let me know is you have to pour it over ice. So it's not like a typical red wine where you drink at room temperature. You actually pour it over ice. So
Do you taste the
salud.
notes of the cinnamon and the
Yeah.
hibiscus?
So
Salud.
you definitely taste the hibiscus. I don't taste a lot. I mean, like at the kind of at the end, you taste a little bit of the cinnamon. But
Mhm.
here's the thing. I thought like it sounds because it's in the mood, it's like in the vein of aguas frescas. That's kind of how he did it.
Okay.
But when he was telling me that, I was thinking, oh, well, it's probably going to be sweet. And I'm not somebody, I do like sangria, right? You have to, it's
Mhm.
like good summer,
Yeah.
you know, so I wasn't sure how I was going to like it, but it's to me personally, it kind of tastes like an unsweetened sangria,
Okay.
like
That's
without all
interesting.
of the sugar,
Okay.
right? So it kind of tastes like that. I had my youngest taste it as well, and he liked it. My husband was like, he was not a fan of it.
Mhm.
But me and my youngest stepson really like it, or my youngest son. I'm trying to, like, they
Mhm.
told me I can call them, and I just feel like I never want to overstep my boundaries, right?
Right.
So salud.
Salud, salud.
Uh,
If I could ask, is it a good summer wine? Because
it
I'm on the East
is.
Coast, so we're finally getting good weather. And so, yeah, I just want to know if it's a good summer wine.
Yeah, you know what? I like it. If you're somebody who's like thinking you're gonna get sangria, you're not. If it's not sweet like an aguas frescas would be,
Mhm.
even a Jamaica aguas frescas, but um it has a little tang. I don't know how to explain it. It's so hard to explain, but you do taste the Jamaica in there, right? You do taste the hibiscus. You definitely taste the red wine. You get like that, like I said, at the very end, you get a little bit of the cinnamon. So it's not over, because it's not, it's cinnamon tea that's in
Right.
it.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's obviously it's not going to be super overwhelming,
Right. It's subtle.
but
Hmm.
yeah, it's really light. And like I said, I am somebody who I tend to kind of stave off on like really heavy red wines
Hmm.
during the summertime. Well, it depends like what
Same.
I'm
Hmm.
eating and whatever. So to be able to like have this, put this in my like travel wine glass, right?
Hmm.
With some ice, I'm like, yeah, I'm down. So no, it's good. It's really good.
Well, enjoy, enjoy. I'll be over here
As I
sipping my
take
Coke
another sip.
Zero.
I'm like, yeah, it's good. Sip, sip. I'm probably, there's not much left in this bottle, but so I probably will finish it during our conversation.
That's how you
So,
know it's good.
right? I
Mhm.
know. I love seeing you smile. You just look like you're ready.
I
So
am. Yeah, I'm so
let's,
excited to chat with you.
oh my God. You just gave me the sweetest compliment before we started. So I hope I live up to to what you've been listening to. If you
I have
like
no doubt.
everything. So you are a Bronx girl. You are Latina from the Bronx. I am so, because I grew up in San Diego, so very different. But but I love New York. Actually, I will be in New York again in July. So I love going there. I love the energy. I feel like if I would have never moved to Dallas, I probably would have moved to New York, and I probably would still be living there. Like I probably wouldn't have ever left. That's
Do you
kind
know
of how.
what's funny is that I am a Bronx girl, but always wanted to live on the West Coast. Since I
Really?
was a little kid, I had this feeling of I think I'm supposed to be in California. And so my dad took me when I was 7 years old out to Los Angeles. And I remember calling my mom and telling her, I'm going to stay here.
Ah,
And I just loved it from a little girl, just loved everything about it. And she said, put your father on the phone and was like,
ah,
make sure, like, get this out of her head. She's not gonna live there. And but every time I go there, I just feel so connected. I love the energy. I love my energy. Like I just show up differently when I'm there. And so I love the vibe. So if you ever want to swap places, let me know.
yeah. It's so funny because I feel the same way about New York. But here's the thing: I live in San Diego, love San Diego. I prefer San Diego way more to than LA or Orange County or anywhere else. This is where I grew up. But like now, I don't ever want to move anywhere else, right? If
Yeah.
I won like millions and millions in the lottery where I had like some crazy amount of money, I would buy a place in New York to have a place there and have a place here. But I do show up differently in New York as well. And
What do you
it's,
think that's about?
I don't know, but you know what I hear all the time when I'm in New York, people think I'm from New York.
I could see that. Actually, like just even seeing you, like you give me like a New York vibe. So I could kind of see that, yeah, that it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, so it's so funny. Like when I'm there, I don't know, it just something comes out, I guess, or whatever. But I don't, it's just I will say this. I'm in a very walkable part of San Diego, but but I love like when you're in, Manhattan, when you're on the island, every place is walkable.
Absolutely, for sure.
And that's what I love it because you can like stumble upon something and you're like, oh my gosh, I never realized this was here. Oh wow. Oh my gosh, I was just walking and look what I found. And there's just something so iconic and that I love about that,
And
right?
the
Because
city's so new. Like it's interesting because there's so many businesses that come in and come out of the city that honestly you can walk through one neighborhood in March and walk through it again in September and it can look different, it can feel different. There's a new spot, there's a new restaurant. And so it does, it constantly changes and evolves. And so that is like the fun part of New York for sure. But I will say San Diego is a place that I would move to if I was out on the West Coast. I
yeah,
spent time there, it's like conferences and like work things. And I loved it. I loved the vibe of it. I thought the people were great. It was slower than Los Angeles, which I liked. And no shade to Los Angeles though, but I just felt like San Diego, like this is the spot.
yeah. You know, and
Mhm.
I, because I do go to LA a lot for all of these things that have to do for the
Mhm.
podcast and for networking and whatever. And my husband's like, "You're gone again." I'm like, "This is where I have to go." I
Mhm.
hate that we always have to go to LA,
Right.
right? Like that's why we're trying to create stuff here in San
Mhm.
Diego for us so we don't always have to go to LA because it's amazing here. I love it here. And I don't want to live in LA, but I do appreciate LA for
Right.
what it is and my friends and everything like that. But yeah, San Diego, it always has my heart. I lived in Dallas for 15 years, and when I decided I was moving back home, nobody was surprised. Everybody was
Really?
like, yeah, nobody was surprised. They're like, yeah, we knew one day you were going to go back. So, um, but I want to hear about like that growing up in the Bronx because you're Puerto Rican and Cuban.
Yes. Mhm.
And although they're both Caribbean and there's a lot of similarities, there's also like a lot of differences as well. So how was it growing up in a Puerto Rican and Cuban household in the Bronx and how you think that affected you as like what was your view of the world when you were a kid from coming from that perspective?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So my parents came here like lots of people that live in New York, like during the 50s and 60s, a lot of people came from Puerto Rico and Cuba, Dominican Republic to New York City. And so that's why you'll see we're represented really well, especially Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, specifically in New York. And so it's like very common for us to all kind of live amongst each other. The Bronx specifically has the most Latinos of all the boroughs. So you're seeing yourself like walking around in the neighborhood all of the time. And so it was really nice to have that experience. Also, growing up, Manhattan felt like Disney World. Like we didn't leave the Bronx, like we were in the Bronx. So it's like, yes, like my grandmother, she worked in the city, but I would hear almost like it was this faraway land. And so she would come back, and this sticks out in my head so much. She would come back and go to Barnes and Noble for me and buy me these mystery books that I really liked. But just seeing the bag of Barnes and Noble, we didn't have bookstores in the Bronx. So this felt like, wow, there's a place that just sells books. Like even that as a little kid just felt like a whole nother world for me. So it's a very different experience for me growing up in the Bronx when I did of just always having people that look like me. But the difference is I did go to a white school in a white neighborhood. So I had the experience of like, this is what my neighborhood is like, but my school life is like this. So it was this culture shock in a way of kind of having one foot in one world and one foot in another world. And my parents, because they had come over when they were relatively young still, they were still very Americanized at that point because my mom was maybe like 6 or 7 years old. My dad was even younger when he had come here. So they had grown up already living in New York. So when they say New Yorican, it was very much that experience to the point that like later on when I went to college and I started to meet other Latinos that weren't from Puerto Rico, DR, Cuba, and even the words that they would say, I was like, I don't know what that expression means because we didn't have that expression. Even chisme, we call it bochinche for gossip, right?
Really?
And
Is
so
that
even the
Is
first
that Puerto
time,
Rican Spanish?
yes,
Okay, the reason I ask is because I know like a lot of Puerto Rican Spanish was derived of how things sounded.
right,
And so it wasn't necessarily like I mean,
right.
proper Spanish. It was based on like how things sounded. So they would make up their own
Exactly,
dialect.
exactly. So when I would hear certain things, I'd be like, I don't know what that is. And then by context, you kind of sort of figure it out. But that was really once I had gone to college, I had a greater exposure to other Latino communities and kind of understanding like, okay, this is a little bit different than how I grew up and those types of things. So it was a mixed bag. And I'll also say I'm an only child, which is very kind of uncommon in Latino
Yeah.
households. So while a lot of other people will go back to Puerto Rico or go wherever, like for Christmas and those types of things, again, we were in the Bronx. It was the BX, like that's what we knew. So it was a very urban Latino experience growing up.
Wow, you really, really were in that thing. So I grew up in a suburb of San Diego called Escondido. And so I grew up about, I think we're about 40 miles from the Tijuana border, 35, 40 miles from the Tijuana border. And so my experience was very different. I'm second gen. My parents grew up in this state. So it wasn't like same thing, very Americanized and everything. But there were some things that they always kind of held on to, that just those very traditional things. What were those things that your parents were still like, yes, we're very Americanized, but no, no, no.
Oh my gosh. So it was, I mean, there's so many things. So I'll take it from the job. Let's look like professionally. It was get a steady job. Don't do anything creative because creative was seen to them like you're not going to make any money. You're going to be destitute. Like they couldn't see the possibility of making money doing anything other than just like very traditional roles, right? So my mom wanted me to be a doctor. I was named after a soap opera character who was a doctor. So she thought, well, if I name her after this character,
Wait,
yeah.
was it Monica Quartermain from General
Yes.
Hospital?
Yes, that's who it is. Exactly. And so what's funny is I'm so rebellious that for years I was like, I hate science. I hate science. And I think it was because like it was this notion, even as a little kid, of like having my destiny already planned for me. And I was like, no, I rejected medicine. I was like, no, that's not what I'm gonna do. And so then I conversely wanted to be a lawyer. And so it was the opposite. I think just like that little spitfire in me to want to do something differently, but it was very much choose a stable job, don't rock the boat, just kind of be happy with the paycheck that you have. So that was one of the things. The other more like cultural things is you don't sleep over other people's houses, right? You don't tell anybody your business, right? Like everything is a locked vault. Nobody knows anything that goes on inside the house. So there were a lot of those things. I remember I couldn't sleep over people's houses, but no one came to our house because, again, remember, I went to school in a very white neighborhood. And so it was like, okay, you can go to their house for maybe 2 hours and then we'll come pick you up. But they didn't come to our neighborhood. So there were a lot of boundaries of kind of like, this is our space. You don't talk about anything that goes on here. And studying, that was also something else. They were very big into education. My mom did not play. She was very disciplined when it came to that. As soon as you come home, you immediately do your homework and you don't slack when it comes to it. If I didn't get A's, it was like the world was ending for her. And so it was a lot of like a very disciplined household too.
Wow. I feel like most of the time people were at our house all the time. I'm the oldest of three girls, so our house was kind of like sent the like where everybody came. My mom, um, for the most part, didn't work. My dad, was able to make enough back then, in the 80s and 90s. He was able to make enough to support the family. So our house was the house where all the sleepovers came in. I went to a couple, but not very many. I mean, those were like really hard. My mom had to know the parent. Like it was like you had to. It was one of those
You
like you
had to
have
go
to
through
know this.
background checks, right?
Yes,
Like,
basically,
yeah.
basically. And so, I find that really, you know, interesting, like the things that our parents decide, even if they grow up here, what they decide they're really going to hold on to as far as like those core values and everything. But I'm interested in hearing, like, you said you went to like pretty much like an all white school. How did that happen? And as you're in your formative years, right? I would imagine that could be really, really hard to not see peers or teachers or anybody who reflect who you are. How did you navigate that growing up?
So it's a funny thing because instead of feeling like I was the only, I didn't really let that affect me. Like there was always something, I was always very ambitious, even as a kid. I remember being in pre-K and we were going to have a pre-K graduation, and I wanted a solo in the pre-K graduation. And I remember telling the teacher, I have my family coming, so I'm gonna need a solo. As if every other kid didn't
As
have
a
their family
pre-K
coming.
versus
But
a
I
pre-K
didn't think of it
child.
that way. It's like, you think of it from a 4-year-old, very selfish mindset, because at 4, everything is just your world, right?
Yeah.
And so they gave me a solo. And I kind of learned, like, okay, like closed mouths don't get fed. So if you ask for things, then you can kind of get these things that you want if you are bold enough to ask for it. So when I went to my school and education, I was always that same person, like raised my hand, I asked the questions, I was valedictorian, I was school president. Like that was just kind of, I didn't think of anything differently about it because it was very much like I'm worried about me. I'm not kind of thinking about everybody else and like how they're perceiving me. And maybe there's something about the naiveness of that, of not being aware that other people are seeing me differently, as other people are viewing me, and like the parents are viewing me as the only Latina. I never really thought of it that way. I just thought I was just always very like kind of focused on what I was doing, and like my friends were just my friends. And because I had all of my friends at home were Latino or Black, I just thought, well, I just have a mix of everything. And so
Yeah.
I didn't really spend time kind of thinking about that I was different in school.
And when you would come home, would your friends ever ask you about what was going on and because I'm sure you didn't have, I
Yeah.
don't know, did you have many friends that also went to that school from your
There was only
neighborhood?
one other person that had gone, that I remember now. She was like my best friend. She lived on the second floor. I lived on the fourth floor. And we would get a lot of the kids would joke on us about our uniforms because that made us very different. So we would stand out. I had a bright red plaid skirt. So there was like no hiding what that was going to look
Wait, I have
like.
to ask, did you go to Sacred Heart?
I did. Yep. I went to Sacred Heart. Absolutely. And
Yeah,
so
that's
it
hilarious.
doesn't even exist anymore, which breaks my heart because I really did love it there. And it was a very small school, but they would kind of not so much ask about it, but they would kind of make fun of the fact that I was like one of the only people that had gone to Catholic school. And that was like their vibe.
Yeah. Okay, I do have to ask this since you went to Sacred Heart.
Yeah.
Was there a sense of pride around Sacred Heart being where Jennifer Lopez went as well?
Jennifer Lopez actually went to Holy Family.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I thought
Yeah.
she went to Sacred Heart.
No, she went to Holy Family, and I
How I
had a lot of.
remember these names, I don't even know. I'm
You're
not
really
from New
good.
York.
But you're so good because the neighborhood Catholic school was Holy Family. So I grew up in that same neighborhood that she did. And a lot of my friends had been taught by her mom. And so it was like this like kind of close connection of like you're really like 1 degree away from J-Lo because my friends have been taught by her mom. But for some reason, and I have no idea why, they sent me to this other school. To this, I don't know. And so I just ended up being in this other place. And so it was a great school though, like I said, very small. It was actually not even like an official, like the school building were actually these private houses. These like beautiful private houses, but that they had converted into a school.
Oh,
So
wow.
it looked like you were walking into somebody's house every day, but when you went in, it was classrooms and like rows of desks, like a traditional school, but the outside of it looked very different.
Wow. See this, maybe this is why people think I'm from New York when I'm there. I'm remembering
Yeah.
random. I don't even know how I knew that, to be perfectly honest.
I love it. I don't know how you knew it either, but it's great. I feel like, okay, this is cool.
I got you, girl. I got you. Um, so growing up, because you were talking about like you were really talking about your mom and what she was kind of instilling in you and what she wanted you to do. You're talking about your dad taking you. Where who do you think they were equal participants in how you saw the world? Does that make sense? I'm
Yeah,
trying
that's
to
like,
let yeah.
yeah, no, I love that question. I don't think I've ever been asked that. And I will also say my parents have since passed away. So I appreciate being able to like talk about them and like share things about them. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. I think I'm definitely a blend of both of them. And what I mean by that is my dad was I'm convinced he wanted a boy, like most men want boys, right? And so it was me. And so he taught me everything about sports. So since I was like 4 or 5 years old, like I remember watching sports with him. I remember trying to read the newspaper from the back page to the front because the sports were in the back. We would go to baseball games. We would go to wrestling. I remember, Dito, my father would get tickets like from the resellers that are right outside the arena. And there were times that we would sit in the very last row, like literally the wall was like right behind us. But it was like an opportunity to like show me these different things with the money that he had. My dad also worked really hard. He was a truck driver, but he always had like a million extra side jobs. So I remember like my dad is really, he's trying very hard to give me opportunities and experiences that he didn't have. And the same time when I'm going to California to see it, he's never been there before. So it's like we're sharing these experiences for the first time together because really he had come from Puerto Rico to New York. And I mean, maybe he went to like New Jersey or Pennsylvania because it's all kind of within the tri-state, but he hadn't gone to these other places. So we were experiencing that together. So I think I would say my sense of adventure came from my father. My work ethic definitely came from my father. My mom, on the other hand, I would say her like assertiveness, her like go after it. Don't, you're not going to be a wallflower. You're not going to let anybody walk all over you. Like all of those things like really came from her. Like she gave me that sense. I remember even as a kid, I was a little bit quieter. I could be like meek at times. And my mom was like, nah, you're gonna toughen up. And I'm gonna teach you how to toughen up. And she did, like she really did. There were like certain lessons and she was good with it. She was stealth and she would drop certain gems and kind of ninja me in the back of my mind of kind of thinking about things in a different way. But the way that I'm able to go after things now is truly because of my mom's influence.
Oh, I love that. I love a strong Latina woman, especially because
Mm.
my mom was the same way, right? Like her thing was the answer is always no if you don't ask the question.
Yes,
Right. So that's like I still go, they would make me do like go ask that, and I'd be so embarrassed. They're like, what's the worst that could happen?
right.
They say no, then nothing changes.
Exactly.
You're not, you're not going to be any worse than you are now. But if
Right.
they say yes, that could, that could open a door. But if you say nothing, it's like you never asked in the first place. So the answer is
Yeah,
always no when you don't ask the
right.
question.
One yes can change your whole life. It's really true.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
um, I love that they brought so much of that you feel like you have so much of both of them. Um, I know in your way when I ask you in your why, you said losing your family at a young age left a big scar. And I love the way you're talking about your parents. How old were you by the time they both passed, and what, like, I can only imagine, obviously you're saying it's leaving a big scar, being an only child as well. I'm sure that you have, who are those people that you're able to share those memories with about your parents?
Yeah, so in 2019 I'd given my TEDx talk called The Flip Side of Loneliness, where I actually share about losing my family. And it starts with the phone call that I get from my grandfather saying to come to the hospital that my mom is dying. And it was actually the first time I'd ever really spoken about my family passing away was in that TEDx talk because I needed to go through a lot of healing and a lot of like my own stuff of if I share this part of my story, how are people going to perceive me? Is in my story to share because it's happened to them. But then I had to realize like, well, yes, they passed away, but it's also I'm talking about my own experience and the effects of what happened. So my mom was 16 when she passed away, and my dad was 22. I was 22 when my dad passed away. So it was really between 16 and 23, I lost my biological family, all of my biological family.
Oh,
And
wow.
so by then I was kind of on my own. But I lived on my own pretty much, I would say since I was about 16 or 17 years old. Once my mom passed away, I lived in the same apartment that she and I grew up in, um, for as long as I could until my dad was like, hey, legally, like this isn't supposed to happen. And like I know you're kind of like holding things down as a 16-year-old, but if people were to find out, like you could actually be put into foster care. So I'm gonna move in here with you. And that really rocked me because it felt like when he moved in, it was this realization of my mom is really gone, right? Because now she was no longer occupying that bedroom. Now my dad was occupying her bedroom. And so that was like a big boom of like, oh, this is really happened now. And so I had a very hard time at that point, kind of figuring out what that process was going to be like for me. And so then I went and lived with my friend who I shared, lived on the second floor. And then I had my very wild child era, which I was just trying to figure out like who I was at that point. Like it just felt like someone took a snow globe to my life, but like it just kept going on. Like it never settled for like a long time. And so it took a lot of years before it settled because it was like dominoes, one after another. People in my family were passing away. And so there was no ability to heal because as soon as you started the process, someone else unfortunately had passed away. And then it was reopening the wound and reopening the wound, and kind of the wound was even getting bigger. So once everything sort of, I mean, it's terrible to say calm down, but it's like essentially when everyone had passed away, that's when I was kind of in this place of trying to figure out, okay, what is life going to be like? And at this point, I was working, kind of moving up the corporate ladder and very much in survival mode because now there's no couch to sleep on, there's no safety net. Like life is on me. It's all on my shoulders to figure out what it is that I'm going to do, who am I going to be, how am I going to survive? Like all of those big questions I had to figure out at a really young age.
I get, I feel like, especially when we're close to our parents, losing a parent just rocks your world, especially if you're close with them
Mhm.
and they have such a positive influence on your life. When you're going through that, and you're saying you're going through the corporate ladder, you're just on survival mode. By the time it comes to graduating high school, that's a huge moment, right? A
Mhm.
huge moment that obviously you don't have all of your family there for. Then you're starting your first day, I'm assuming in college. You can
Mhm.
correct
Yep.
me if not.
Mhm.
So, how do you go through all of those things? Like, what was survival mode for you? Because I feel like everybody has their own things that they do to survive. So, for you, what was your survival mode to be able to get through that and be able to say, okay, I'm still going to college? Because I feel like some people would let that determine and change everything for them. Did that change everything in regards to your perspective, or did it clarify things?
So what's interesting is, as I shared earlier, that education was a really important piece. It's so interesting because it's like why I really believe in destiny and fate and all of these things, because it's almost like the lessons that they were teaching me as a child, I didn't know how much I was going to need them so much earlier than I thought. So remember, they had talked about education, they had talked about a steady job. So now I already sort of had this mindset since I was little of like, okay, the way forward is education and a steady job. And so because that was already kind of embedded in me, I was like, well, I'm going to do what I know how to do, which is I'm going to continue to pursue my education. I'm going to get internships. I'm going to rely on my intelligence and my resourcefulness in order to go from the next rung on the ladder to the next rung on the ladder until I feel safe. And so all of the lessons that they had basically passed, and whether it was like their fears or whatever it had come from, was really what I took with me to get through that survival mode. So in college, I was like, I'm not only just graduating with a degree, I'm going to make sure I already have a job when I graduate. So I remember graduating in May. I had a job already locked down in April and I knew my exact start date. So when I graduated, I didn't have any stress. I was like, okay, in July, I'm starting this corporate job and away we go. And so a lot of it was just continuing to run forward and really not thinking about it. So imagine if you're trying to climb up a rope and there's like water kind of rising above. My whole mentality was I just have to be 1 foot above the water so it doesn't catch me.
Wow. Guy, I can't, I feel like I've been in survival mode in my own way. And I don't know if I've ever thought of like, as I'm asking you these questions, I'm starting to think for myself, like how, when
Mhm.
I was in survival mode, like what did that look like for me? And probably, I encourage everybody listening. Like if you've ever, I think that's a good reflection to do, right? Like if
Yeah.
you've ever been in survival mode, what did that look like for you?
Yeah.
Because I think that's someplace you're like, I don't ever want to feel like that again, or I don't ever want to, like, how to motivate yourself to not be like that. And I think we all have those moments still throughout life that we're always going to be in survival, or that we're
Yeah.
going to still have moments that we're in survival mode because life is life, right? Life
Yeah,
happens.
for sure.
When you went into your corporate job, obviously you feel like you're fulfilling your parents' wish, you're getting the corporate job. What
Mhm.
kind of industry were you working in?
So I had an economics degree, but I did all of my internships in business and marketing. And I loved marketing. I always loved the psychology of people, and marketing is essentially trying to understand like buyer psychology. And so I went into roles that were all connected to marketing. And so I really did enjoy that aspect of it. I didn't, what I didn't love was having people tell me what to do. I never really loved having people tell me what to do. And the rigidity and kind of politics of corporate. I
Yeah.
remember coming in, I had like this really heavy Bronx accent at the time, like much more than I have now, and having my first job, but I was very lucky because my manager was also Puerto Rican. So I was able to go into corporate America, and very few people are lucky enough to have someone that's already in that position that is also Latino. So I really lucked out in that because he could see I was kind of like this diamond in the rough, and he was like, okay, I'm gonna help smooth out some of these edges because I would say wild things in meetings, not knowing that they were wild. It was just
Okay,
very direct
what's
and
the
straightforward.
wildest thing you ever said in a meeting?
So I can't remember that, but I know that people would say that I was condescending. And at the time, I'll be honest, I didn't know what that meant. So I remember we were in his office very clearly, and he's like, well, sometimes people say you're condescending. I was like, yeah, I've heard that. I don't know what that means. And then he explained to me what it meant. And I was like, I'm not condescending. They're just not that smart. And he was like, that's condescending right there.
Damn,
But
girl,
it was
but I
in
love
a
it. But
high,
I love
right?
it.
And so, but I appreciated that I could say that. And I remember when I said it, he started laughing. Like he didn't take offense. Like he allowed me to be who I was. And he laughed and it was like, you probably are, but you can't tell people that. And he's like, so this is how we're going to work with things. And so again, remember, one thing about survival mode is like you kind of have these blinders on, right? And you're not necessarily thinking, well, how is the sweetest way for me to say something? It's like, no, 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 I need this to work because I have to survive. So my mentality was very much that way. And it was a little more, I guess, animalistic in this way of kind of survival, right? Pure survival. And so he helped me just kind of hone in the way that I communicated with people, which is so funny, like the work that I do now, essentially, because it is about communication and public speaking and all of that. But ooh, in the beginning, your girl was rough. It was definitely rough the way I said things.
Do you think that because of that, do you think people looked at you as the rough Latina from the Bronx or the rough girl from the Bronx? Like, like, how do you think that your corporate career progressed or not because of that?
I was promoted 4 times in 4 years in corporate America.
There
I
you
was
go.
the youngest VP in that whole department because of exactly how I showed up. Because even though I had a slick mouth, and I say this with not any level of arrogance, but just pure knowing, and I hope everybody can lean into their own knowing of who they are. I was very smart. I was very good at my job. I worked my ass off in that job. I went above and beyond and I earned all of those promotions. And I also made sure I asked for all of those promotions, which a lot of people didn't do and felt like they couldn't do, or they had to wait, oh, 2 years here and then 3 years here. And I was like, no, no, no. Look at the track record. We're getting promotions over here. And I just had this confidence of like, I'm not asking because I want a handout. I'm literally backing up everything that I'm doing. So even though they might have thought so many ways about me, they couldn't deny that I actually was really good at my job.
So you showed up day one as your authentic self.
I did. I
I
did.
love that because so many of us don't, myself included. I know I have it. Now I do. It's like what you see is what you get, right? Um, you get the big hoops and the big hair and the big mouth.
I had an eyebrow ring and I would just put a band-aid over it, thinking I was slick, like no one could see that
Would
I
you
had
pull
an
in a
eyebrow
Nelly,
ring.
trying to be Nelly with
Yeah, with the little band-aid.
like
And it
on
was,
the cheek?
girl, how long you gonna say you have a cut on your eye? Like your cut never heals? Like, are you okay? And so eventually I would like take it out and like, put it back in and all that. And then eventually I took it out because as I did get promoted, then you start to realize like, okay, you're required to show up differently in different spaces. And then it was just more about me making the choice to do those things. But in the beginning, it was exactly who I was for sure.
Okay, so I want to hone in on something you said as you move up. So as you move up, did you feel like you had that you couldn't show up as authentically as you are? Did you feel like you had to code switch? Did you feel like you had
Yes.
to like how did you handle that? How did that affect you as you were moving up in the ranks?
So when I left that company that I was with when I first started and I moved to the next company, it was in a consulting role and I was very client facing. And because of that, it required me to travel a lot to different places in the country, in different places of I'd never seen before, hadn't traveled other than, I mean, I had the LA trip when I was like 7, but other than that, I wasn't really going anywhere at that point. And so now I was in these spaces that the expectation, because I was a consultant and everything, if you've ever worked in consulting or any of the listeners have worked in consulting, every hour that you are not being billed to the client, you are considered on the beach. And if you are on the beach, then you are not really an asset to the company anymore. So you have to think all the time of I need to make sure I have billable hours. So that pressure, I couldn't show up. Like the eyebrow ring, I could have never done that. And so that was a lot of conforming, and I absolutely hated it. Like hated it in every bone in my body. And I tried to do it for as long as I could. I lasted 13 months in that role because I was on the road all the time, Monday through Friday. I would work in a conference room so imagine a round table. There's a docking station in the middle of the table where you all plug in your laptops. And there would be anywhere between like 6 to 8 of us around this table for 12 hours a day. And I was like, I'm an only child. I love my freedom and I'm confined to this room. And then the room was made of glass. So everyone else at work could just look, it was like a fishbowl essentially. And it
Oh,
was just driving me crazy.
I
And I felt
hate
like I couldn't do this. It was terrible. And at that point, it was feeling like I need to get out of here. This is really hard. And so I finished the obligations to the client because I didn't want to, make the company look bad. And it was also my own personal and professional integrity. But then once that engagement was over, I was like, I'm out. And I resigned without having a job. I was like, I'm good. I've been saving money. I will find something else, but this is not for me anymore.
I hate when people can see what I'm doing. Even I might be working and everything, but you don't know how I work. You don't know what my work style is. You don't know what I'm working on at the moment. I hate that feeling like somebody's looking over my shoulder, judging what I'm doing when you don't
Same.
do that job.
Yes, same. And it's also like at some point, I'm gonna just be honest. There's times where you just don't want to hear people yapping around you all the time. And it gets exhausting having these very artificial conversations day in and day out, week after week after week for 13 months. It's a lot. At least it was a lot for me. It's like, I don't know if you have this expression, come mierda, right? But for us,
Yeah.
it to me, that's what it felt like. It was constantly being in this place where I was being asked to do this and it wasn't a good place to be. That even when I went home, I would start to feel anxious as soon as I landed because I was already thinking, oh my gosh, I have to get back on a plane in 48 hours. And so there was so much anxiety that even came with knowing I'm only here for 2 days before I have to go back.
Wow. So after you decided you're like, this is not for me after 13 months, you're in this place where you're like, wait, I don't have a job. What do you do from there? Like, what do you
I
like? How
enjoyed
do you pick
summer.
with it? Huh?
I enjoyed my summer. I had
Girl,
I had money that was saved. I was good. I was like, I'm gonna enjoy summer. I went on bike rides. I went to the beach. I just had like a ball like over the summer. I saw friends, like everybody I hadn't seen for the past 13 months. I just had a good ass time. And then once the summer was over, I was like, okay, I'll look for a role. And then I found another role.
That is so I'm loving this. I'm loving the like how you show up for yourself, because if we don't show up for ourselves, nobody else is going to do it.
1,000%. And no one is going to ride for you the way you ride for yourself. And if you're not riding for yourself, that's the first thing you have to check for
Yeah.
sure.
I am just I'm like, can I be you when I grow up? Can I have that confidence?
You're already doing it. You're already doing it.
Well, so how do you go from like this corporate thing and then decide that you want to pivot to a personal, I mean, obviously personal brand strategist is part of marketing, right? You're
Right.
figuring out how to market. So how do you decide that's like kind of that's where you want to lean in and leave corporate behind? And what was the hardest part of that? Because there's like you said, we think there's stability behind that. There's this behind that, but I think I've said this over and over again to so many people. 2020 really showed us there's no such thing as a stable job,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so how do you pivot from like I'm in corporate, yay, I took the summer off, to because I feel like you would almost go into that dread of a school, like, oh, I'm starting school again. Why can't summer last longer? Like after that
Yes.
time was done, I feel like that's the feeling that I would have. But then also the moment where you're like, you know what? I'm done with this. I need to
Mhm.
build something for myself.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say for me, it was accumulation. So people typically ask, like, was there one thing? It wasn't one thing. It was just a series of things where I just felt I went from first starting my career feeling really happy, energetic, optimistic, all of those things. And as the years went on, it was just a little bit less, like turning the dial down a little bit less and a little bit less to when I was like, oh, it's cool. And then it was like, oh, this is okay. And then it was like, well, it's called work. It's not called fun. And you see it kind of keeps just dropping a level. And then I got to a point where I was like, I really don't like this. Like, I don't like what I'm doing. This doesn't feel rewarding. This doesn't feel fulfilling. I don't feel like I'm using my capabilities in the best way. And I remember trying within the company to see if there was other things that I could do. And it felt like every door was closing. I was like, what's happening? Because I've had this corporate career so far where when I knocked on doors, the doors would open. And now I was in this space where it's like every door was just closed. I was like, all right. And I started to doubt my confidence. So it's funny that you say, like, oh, to have my confidence, because I started to really doubt myself. And I was like, this isn't feeling great. And so I thought about podcasting, and I had listened to podcasts since 2000. So I've listened to podcasts for 15 years. So I don't know.
Oh, girl, you were on the freaking
Yeah, I
beginning
was.
of it.
So I started my own podcast in 2007, but I had been listening for years and years before that. So in 2017, I started my podcast, but years before I had been listening. And that was the thing for me. I was like, I'm going to just do this and I'm going to talk about personal development, which is far away from business and marketing. And this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to be honest, I did it for me. I did it to show myself I can learn new skills. I'm gonna teach myself how to produce. I'm gonna teach myself how to edit. I'm gonna market the shit out of my show. I'm gonna, do all the things. And so from there, like 1 year in, I had a fellowship with NPR, and then I spoke at Podcast Movement, and now the doors were opening again. And I was like, I was knocking on the wrong doors. That's why they weren't opening. It's like the doors open, but I hadn't been knocking on the right ones. And I started to basically just light myself back up by getting into podcasting. And once I did that, it was like I'm dangerous once I get like really motivated. And so I was just like, I'm gonna just keep creating these opportunities. And then I started speaking, but now no longer for the companies that hired me, but speaking under my own name about my own experiences and talking about workplace culture and generational diversity and DE&I, and then now about personal branding. And what really got me to the place where I do this now for my business is the reality is when you said, like, after we saw what happened in 2020, there's no stability. There's also a very shrinking middle class. And many of us are in middle class, right? And the walls are closing in um, on anybody who's in the middle class right now. Whether we want to see it or not, it's happening all the time. We have to find ways to make our own money outside of that. I'm not saying that everyone needs to quit their jobs. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying that we all need to have alternate ways to make money and like additional income streams. And I don't want to see people get squeezed out anymore. I want people to, it's like not updating your resume until you need your resume, right? At that point, now you're reactionary, right? Now it's like you're working against your brain, you're working against your emotions, you're working against bill collectors. Now everything is done in a panicked way. When you build your personal brand intentionally, those things are already working for you. And maybe you're going to need it, maybe you're not, but it's there for you. And that's the thing. To me, it's the ultimate backup plan. It's the ultimate form of passive income because your personal brand is working for you while you're sleeping. You can wake up to opportunities. I wake up to people inviting me to speak. That's an amazing feeling, right? But it's because I've worked on not only my reputation, but also what I want to be known for. And when you do that enough times, you start to have these opportunities for yourself. And that opportunity comes with extra income, extra impact, and it just creates more breathing space for people.
So one of the things that you really talk about when it comes to um, you know, personal branding and everything is, you know, finding that career confidence mid-career because
Mhm.
or as an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
I feel like I think a lot of people feel they're in their career. People, I'm in my 40s, right? And I think a lot of people I've I felt like I got to a certain level, right? I wasn't like a VP or anything like that, but I was like director of
Yeah.
communications. I was doing my thing. And then when I got let go from work, it was like a relief. It was a relief because I didn't, I just felt like I could make more impact. In my particular case, I felt like I was always, people were always side eyeing me for my ideas. I'm like, you asked me for new ideas, I'm bringing new ideas. But I didn't always vibe with some, with a particular person.
Mhm.
And they were the mentee, they were being mentored by one of the higher ups. So that caused a lot of friction. So when I got let go, it was like it was like oh my gosh, I can breathe. And then now going into this, just now fully diving into the podcast and events and trying to do this whole speaking thing and everything. It's really like really trying to find that confidence again. Like I'm confident in what I do, but I'm not always confident in every aspect. And I
Yeah.
imagine a lot of people feel like that, right? Like, okay, I know I'm good at what I do, but then if you don't maybe get the feedback that you want, or you don't get the raise, that can always be a knock on your confidence and your ego and everything. So when somebody's in that, right, and they're mid career, you're not at
Mhm.
the pinnacle of your career. Maybe you're heading up, or maybe you are at the but you're still in
Mhm.
your 30s, 40s, and even 50s. You're still in the middle of your career.
Mhm.
How do you help? Like, how do you find that confidence again?
Yeah, you said something very important. It's like I can be confident in what I do. And what I help people do is become confident in who they are. Because when you're confident in who you are, full stop, then what you do kind of doesn't matter as much, right? Because you're bringing you to whatever it is that you're doing. So if you feel like I'm solid, like my skills, my story, my expertise, my talents are solid, then I can apply it to so many different areas, right? And so that's what I want people to tap into. And what I noticed specifically, I work with people who are BIPOC communities. So I work with men, I work with women, but they're usually Latino, Black, Asian Pacific. Like it's that community that I'm working with. And I love it because the themes show up the same way. Oftentimes we're told not to brag about ourselves. And so we think that when we talk about ourselves, it's bragging because the thought has been in our head of like, oh, you're bragging. It's not. It's not bragging if it's true. if you're making shit up, like I don't want to work with someone who's making something up, right? But I want you to be able to stand in the things that you do. And as we think about technology, technology is happening faster than anything else is keeping up. It's faster than the infrastructure we have, it's faster than our education system, it's faster than the way we're upskilling people at work, which is why you're seeing all these layoffs. There's not even opportunity for people to learn the new technology because they're already being laid off, right? And so where are those people supposed to go? And so when I think about how technology is changing, the one thing that can't be replicated is your individual story. And if you tap into your individual story, that is going to be the thing that sets you apart. Whether you want to get a promotion, you want to get a new job, you want to start your own business, you want to start speaking on stages, you want to continue to speak on bigger stages, the story is going to be the differentiator. Because people use this example all the time, but it's like buying ice cream, right? Breyer sits there with Haagen-Dazs and Ben and Jerry's, and they all kind of sit together, and all their companies make billions of dollars. So people will say, oh, but someone else already does that. It doesn't matter. They don't do it like you. They're not looking at it as you. We can look at this, we can taste the same bottle of wine and have two totally different experiences about it, right? And you can talk about it and be like, oh, I taste this note and that note, and this is what I compare it to. And like your husband was like, I don't like it. He's going to have
Yeah.
a completely different story, but you're talking about exactly the same thing. Like that's a perfect example of leaning into who you are. So it's not about the what, it's not about the bottle of wine, but your experience about the bottle of wine versus his is what's going to be separate. And that's the work that I do with people.
Okay, I can already tell you're probably very good at this because you instantly related it to something that I like, which is wine. Girl, I picked up on that. I'm sure you do that with other people. You're like, what do they like? Okay, let's relate it to that. Like, I love, you're right, because that's honestly, I've told so many people that like your greatest strength is who you are.
Hmm.
And I know and I'm sure a lot of people are the same way as I am. I'm very good at speaking and talking up others and reminding them of those things. But when it comes to yourself, we let all the negative things affect us, right? We let all the negative talk. And there's for sure times where something has come in and I'm like, okay, stop thinking that. Or, yesterday I was talking to my friend Norma
Hmm.
and she was like, I'm hoping, wait, stop, when like literally both of us in the middle, like of our conversation, realized like how we were talking and how we had to just shift
Yeah.
the wording to not be like hopeful, right?
Right.
Hope springs eternal. You can hope all you want, right?
Yes. Hmm.
But not hope, but have more action speak behind it. Like when this
Yeah.
happens, when this, because I think we know, generally we know we have to speak to ourselves kindly. We have to speak to ourselves positive way. Our mind is constantly manifesting things, but it's manifesting good things and bad things based on how you're speaking about yourself, speaking of
Absolutely.
how you're speaking. So how do we get, it's like, how do you go from that to I'm gonna speak at a TED? I'm confident enough. I'm gonna apply for a TEDx. I'm ready to speak on that stage. I'm gonna I'm gonna apply to be a guest on that podcast because I know I have something to say.
So, I mean, I'll say this, right? Do you remember Barbara Walters?
Yes.
Okay. I grew up also watching Barbara Walters, and she had 2020, and she would do like the Academy Awards special, and she did The View and all that. And what I remember, even as a little kid, thinking she's always promoting her shit, right? She's always talking about, she could be on a Tuesday talking about flowers and be like, but this Friday on 2020, I'm going to be talking about whatever. And I'd always think like this woman is out here just constantly hawking like the stuff that she does. And one day there was one episode of The View I was watching, and I always try to find it so I can reference this and talk, and I can't find it. And she was talking about her book. She had just written her book, and it was this really thick memoir of her life. And the co-host would tease her about like, oh, here she goes again, audition, this book that she has. And she said, I learned very early on that I'm working really hard on the things that I'm doing. I put so much into the work that I'm doing. Why wouldn't I want other people to know about it? And I can't find the clip. And it was one passing comment that she said, But that always stayed with me in that instant. I was like, that's it. Why would we work so hard? It gives me goosebumps. I can feel it in the back of my head and not want people to know about it. And our people have worked so hard, and there's so much shit that we come into a room with, thinking about our hair, code switching, microaggressions, taking care of our family, the pressures that we have for our children, the people in our lives, thinking about ourselves, thinking about our own dreams, our own aspirations. This comes with us before we even open the door of our job. We are literally bringing all of that with us. We have to talk about ourselves. We have to have the confidence to big up ourselves. And if you have to think about everything that you have gone through to get to this point, then let that be the thing that just propels you to talk about yourself that day. And then let the new evidence be the next thing that propels you. Because once you start doing it, you're going to look back and be like, oh shit, I did do this and I did do that. But it's like we have to be able, why work so hard and then not want people to know about it?
Girl, no joke. I feel like this is everything you're saying is like what I need to hear right now. And I know if I need to hear it, other people probably need to hear it too. But just the fact, like recently, um, I was honored as an influential Latina by Hispanic Lifestyle magazine.
Good. That's amazing. Clap it
Thank
up, clap it up.
you. And then, but it's like, oh yeah, I was given this. I was honored with this. And you get in, as extroverted as I am, right? As extroverted, I love talking to people. I don't like being the spot. I don't like the spotlight on me, right? So anytime things come up, I always switch it to other people. And this is
Mhm.
something that I've noticed more and more over the last probably like 5 years, where I've really noticed it as I've done the podcast, because the podcast, I always say, it's not about me, it's about the guests. And then people are like, but you're the voice.
Yeah.
This is your baby. This is what you've
Hmm.
started. This is a reflection of who you are.
Yes.
And it took a lot of people saying that before I was like, you're right. Yes, I am. But it still sometimes feels uneasy when, like, that's why I'm not a fan of doing solo episodes.
Hmm.
When I have to do a solo episode, I'm filled with so much anxiety, because that means all of the focus is on me instead of sharing pieces of my life, right?
Hmm.
But mostly focusing on the guest.
Do I have permission to offer something?
Sure.
The people that are listening to us right now, they're not listening for me. They're here for you. I just happen to be in this position this week in this episode, but they are here for you and they come back for you because they trust that the people that you're bringing on is like, okay, you're co-signing. You're essentially co-signing for me, but they want to hear from you, mama. So whether I'm here, Jane is here, Paul is here, and another Jessica is here, it doesn't matter. They're here for you. And so I hope you let that like really sink into your bones and feel that on a deep level, because that is the truth.
Ooh, thank you. Ooh. Oh my gosh, girl, I'm usually that on making people cry. No,
And for
I
anybody who's listening, I do want to say that just like just from like a scientific level. So like when we think about neuroscience, the reason why we have to let these things be celebrated. And for a long time, I was very much the same way. I kind of like let the good things kind of like bounce off. The day that I gave my TEDx talk, which I had spent months working on, that night I had gone to my partner's like niece's events. Like, so I didn't even fully celebrate like in that day. It was like I came home, I changed clothes, and I went to this thing. And I look back on that now and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have savored that more. Like I worked hard for that, right? But one, it's a defense mechanism. We have these defense mechanisms because there's a certain amount of vulnerability that comes when we allow people saying nice things and getting the accolades and the achievements. There's this feeling where the subconscious feeling is, but what if this gets taken away? What if this doesn't last? I need to protect myself. And so when we put it on other people, like you said, like I just want to put the focus on someone else. I don't want to have solo episodes. There's a bit of a defense mechanism that's happening when we do that. But conversely, when we celebrate, our brain starts to get used to like, oh, this is what it's like to celebrate. I'll give you an example. Anybody who's really maybe not so great with money, and have you ever known someone, it's like as soon as they get even a little bit of money in a paycheck, whatever it is, the money goes out just as fast.
Mm.
It's like almost like there's a hole in their pocket and it's just running out of their thing.
Yeah.
When people get extra money, let's say a tax return or whatever, they instantly want to spend it, right? Part of that is sometimes because if you're not used to having money, then even seeing extra money in your bank account feels foreign. It's like, what is this doing here? And it kind of creates this chaos within your body and within your mind. So to feel better, people will get rid of the money because they're used to seeing, I have $100 in the bank account. That's what I'm used to seeing. And anything other than that starts to feel uncomfortable. So they get rid of it and they don't even realize that that's what's happening. So it's like letting yourself sit in the accomplishment of your achievement. Look at what you were named. Like, let yourself sit in it. Be like, yes, I am influential. Yes, I am doing this, right? Like, letting yourself do that, it will start to become like more normal for you in your brain. So then the next award that you get, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, that's how you really start to manifest because now it becomes something like you're not just saying the words, but you also have the evidence to be like, no, I am that good and I'm deserving of these things. And nobody is giving me something because they think I'm cute. I'm actually earning it.
I mean, I'm cute too, but no, it's good.
Yes, but it's not just because of that. You know what I mean? Like they're
Oh,
not just
yes.
doing it to be nice. They're doing it because you are deserving of that award.
Oh, Monica, you are hitting hard today. But I do love it. Obviously the podcast is called Wine and Chisme. Something that you also addressed was the Chisme advantage, which
Mhm.
I believe in, right? So can you talk about what the Chisme advantage is and how somebody can work with that?
I mean, I think everything is different for different people for themselves. I think ultimately you have to find like what your special sauce is. And really, if you don't know what it is, then I encourage you to ask other people what they think your special sauce is. But even as I say that, I'm like, nah, I don't really believe that. I think we all know what we have in us that makes us special,
Right.
right? Whether it's our empathy, whether it's the way we problem solve, whether it's the way we plan parties, whether it's the way that we can like get our kids from here to here to here and all the plates are still spinning. There's something that we have that we know in our hearts that we're really good at. But you have to allow yourself to be like, that's going to be my thing. That's going to be the thing that helps get me to the next level. That's going to be the thing I speak about. That's going to be the thing I monetize. But like, allow yourself to just sit with it. When people tell me, I'm going to think about it. I haven't had time to think. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, do you take your brain out and put it someplace else? We always have time to think. It's like you're choosing to not want to think about this thing now, but the very thing that you're avoiding is the same thing that could be making you so much money and setting you on a completely different future, right? For me, when I started the podcast, the truth is I had a microphone for almost 3 years before I started the podcast, and I talked myself out of it. I could have been talking to you like, oh, I've had a podcast for 11 years now instead of 7 years, right? Because I talked myself out of it. And it's like we talk ourselves out of it and then we watch someone else do our idea. And then we're like, oh, I can't believe they've done the idea, but you could have done it. And so it's
Yeah.
that same thing. Just like listen to what your knowing is about yourself and then go and chase after it with the same way that I told my manager that everybody else wasn't that smart.
What is your special sauce? What is it for you?
Um, I think honestly, my special sauce is being able to, it's like hard to distill and to say it like kind of like the right way, but I feel like I'm good at seeing a complex problem and then breaking it up into simple parts for people to understand. So whether it's a complex problem of like a human being not being able to really see their own gifts, I'm able to see these are the gifts and this is how we can break it up so other people understand it. In corporate America, when it was complex problems, like I used to work in analytics, so it was like propensity models and statistics. I could understand what those problems were and then translate it to people that didn't know what that was. So I think it's the way that I'm able to take like a big topic and being able to educate people and train people on understanding what that is.
I'm going to ask you a question. It might seem kind of random,
Okay.
but maybe not. When you were when you were a little girl, what did you want to be when you were a little girl?
Everything. I'm not even kidding. I had this book that every year, so it was like first grade and second grade and third grade, you would put like a picture of your first day of school, and on the bottom there would be these things of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And every year had like these different options, and then they had two lines where you could write in your own stuff. You could look at that book, and like almost everything was always circled because I really believe like I can do all these things. Like I don't know why, but I just felt I don't have to pick one thing. And so there was one year I wanted to be a basketball player, a hairdresser, and the first Latina Supreme Court justice. I kid you not. And I would tell people, this is what I want to be. And they were like, okay. And like just really dumbfounded of like, I've never heard somebody say they want to be all these very random things. But I feel like for all of us, we have many different chapters in us,
Mhm.
right? Like your chapter, like when you shared, you got laid off. Like, look at the chapter that you're in now. That might have not been something you predicted, but you're doing it, you're succeeding at it, you're excelling at it. We all have different things that we can do. And so as a little kid, I just felt like whatever I want to do, I want to try.
Okay, so let me tell you the reason I asked that question is
Yeah.
because I always feel like, and this is what I've noticed as I've talked to people, right? The strengths that we have as a child, as children, oftentimes don't necessarily translate into our jobs. But then there's something at some moment where something clicks, and what your passion is really the passion that you've had as a child. And now
Mhm.
you figured out, like, oh, wait, this is how I can do that. And I think so often we don't realize it until somebody points it out,
Yeah,
right? So for you wanting to be all these things, you kind of get to touch all of these things by the people that you talk to and work with every single day.
I
So you're
do.
kind of still living this dream, right?
Yeah.
Based on all the people that you get to work with, you get to experience all of these different careers.
Yes, that's so true. And I do, I love it. I think about even my clients are so diverse in the industry that they're a part of. Like some are moms, some are single, some are men, some aren't, some are gay, some are straight. Like it's really like this mix. And I get to live in their worlds with them. And it's just very cool being able to live there and ask them questions and then help them connect the dots for themselves. It's like a really fun career.
Yeah. Like for me, I was always a talker in school. I was
Mm.
always that kid, like, hi, I'm Jessica. How are you? Tell me all about you. Right.
hmm
And same thing, right? Now
Yes.
I still do it, but now I get to record it and drink wine and,
Yep.
you know, be the chismosa I was born to be.
I love it. See, you've stepped into your full power.
I always, for me, I feel like I guess, quote unquote, superpower is building relationships. Um, that's something, I mean, it's because I'm genuinely interested in people.
Me
Like I've
too.
always genuinely really been interested in hearing people's stories.
Yeah.
And I think people sense that. They sense that you're not being fake, you're not being
Yeah.
whatever. You really want to hear what they say. And then people do tell me a lot. But
Mm.
I just think people are fascinating.
I'm the same way. I do. When people tell me like, "Oh, there's nothing interesting about me," I'm like, "That's bullshit. We all have things that are interesting about us."
I say that when people are like, oh, I don't have a story to tell. I'm like, yes, you do. It's my job to get it out.
Absolutely. Exactly. And it's so good. Everybody has stories. They really do. It's like I think they've just been made to feel, or maybe no one's asked them the right questions. And I'm sure you know this, right? People don't ask them the right questions, or they're just not really connecting with them and or making them feel safe. I think safety is also a big thing for people to share their story. It has to feel like there's an environment for people to say it. But we all have a great story. I mean, every single person I've met, I had a client who's like, well, I've just had like an ordinary life. And I'm like, really? Because look at all the things that you've done. And she was like, oh, I guess I kind of have. And it's like our life feels ordinary when we're living inside of it, but it's not our job to think of how other people are going to receive it. That's
Yeah.
my job to think of how
Well,
other
and
people are going to receive it for them.
how many times have you forgotten what, like I do this all the time. I forget the things that I've done
Yeah,
until
same.
somebody's like, well, didn't you do this? Didn't you lead this project? Didn't you do this? Didn't you do this? And I'm like, oh, I did do that.
Yeah.
what is a good way for us to be able, because I feel like if we, whether it's write it down or say, but I'm sure everybody has a different way to do that.
Mhm.
But like, I think, like, how do you encourage people to make sure they're keeping tabs on the great things that they're doing to remind themselves of these things that they're doing?
Every Sunday, I do this for myself. I write down what has happened in the week before, just bullet points, right? Of what has happened in the week before that are the good things that I want to remember. And because it's like as a speaker, I speak at a lot of different companies, and someone asked me the other day, "Oh, what did you speak about at this topic?" And I was like, I don't remember what I talked about then, right? But it's because not because it wasn't special, but because again, I'm on the next speaking gig and I'm thinking about that next particular company or whoever I'm talking to. And so now every Sunday I write down what has happened in that week. And it's just bullet points. Like I spoke at this company or I met this interesting person. But I do that because it's important for us to look back on it. So I would say if you're not someone who's a journal taker, everybody sends a text message. Literally send a text message to yourself and say week of September 15th, and then just put three things that happened that week, three things that went well. I had 100 podcast downloads. I met these two people. I spoke on this stage. I got this promotion. I applied for 5 jobs. But put that down because this is all evidence. And when we're feeling low and we're feeling like F it and what is this all for? Go back and refer to the text message thread. Go back and look at the pages that you've written down. Go to wherever you keep it in a Google Doc or whatever that is, and go back and look at it and build yourself back up based off of all the good shit that you've done.
I love that, girl. It's we've already hit an hour. We've already hit past
I
the
know,
hour.
so fast. I know, I'm
It's
sorry.
so
We've just
fast. No,
talked so much. I know. It's like
don't
we're not even
apologize.
recording.
I loved this conversation. I'm loving this conversation. If people want to get in touch with you, and please get in touch with Monica, like I'm not gonna let her scamper off as soon as we're done recording, just so you uh how do you have your website, which is you want to do what.com,
Yes.
LinkedIn at Monica M. Rivera, and Instagram at do or you want to do
You want to
what?
do what?
Yeah, you would want to do
Yes.
what? Is there anything else, anywhere else that we need to make sure that people know about?
Those are all the places that I am. So definitely reach out if you have any questions about personal brand, about speaking. I'm so committed to having more people of color speak on stages. I think that's so important. I see just the disparity of people who've been able to have that practice versus people who haven't. I want to help you be able to not just land speaking gigs, but also get more speaking gigs. And that's like the art and the business of speaking. So if you have any questions on that, feel free, book a call, reach out, and let's just connect.
Podcast as well.
Yes, podcast. You want to do what? Yep.
And it's on all of the platforms.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Monica, thank you so much. Like, I feel like I know we were having a conversation, but I just feel like so much of what you said resonated with me. So thank you so much for that. I hope that it resonated with, anybody who's watching or listening as well. I'm sure it does, because sometimes we just need that, and everybody works different ways. Everybody has to feel it for themselves and everything like that. But if you guys are interested in all, please reach out to Monica, but just get in line after me.
And I just want to say this. I think the conversations really are only as good as the container, and you provide the container and the space for people. So I want to thank you for providing that space for me and for us and for all of your listeners.
Oh, thank you so much. Honestly, when I started the podcast, it was really about amplifying, and it continues to be that the mission has not changed, right? To amplify voices across communities of color. We've added the more wine aspect to it, obviously, but I always remind people that you don't have to be an influencer to have influence. You don't have to be a million followers or 10,000 followers to have an impact on people. You have a story regardless.
Yeah.
And, it's been amazing having people that have very large followings, and some people don't even have really social media or have a very small social media. But to me, I'm like that I could care less about
Mhm.
than the story that you're sharing and the
Yeah.
story that you're willing to share, because you don't have to be here. None of the other guests have to be here to do that. People don't have to listen, but they do, and you show up, and it is so beyond appreciated.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been great. And after we stop recording, I can't wait to keep talking to you.
Yes, same.
Yes.
So sorry, mi gente. I'm going to talk to Monica and make sure to follow her. And until next time. Hola, mi gente. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wine and Chisme podcast. If you would like to hear more wine and more chisme, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Saludos.